December 14th, 1944. A snow-covered road east of Freihaldenhoven, Germany. Staff Sergeant Robert Morrison, commander of an M36 Jackson tank destroyer from the 72nd Tank Destroyer Battalion, watched through his gunner's telescope as the massive shape materialized through the grey winter haze. The silhouette was unmistakable, low, wide, the turret alone larger than his entire vehicle. A Panzerkampfwagen Tiger the Second. The Americans called it the King Tiger. 70 tons of German engineering that American intelligence had warned could laugh at Sherman shells from 2 kilometers away. Morrison's crew had received their M36 just 6 weeks earlier. They'd been told the 90mm gun would change everything. With high-velocity armor-piercing ammunition, they could finally engage Germany's heaviest tanks on something approaching equal terms. The HVAP rounds sat in their ready rack, 3 of them, 3 precious tungsten-cord projectiles that cased represented months of American industrial effort and global supply chain management stretching back to tungsten mines in China. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The King Tiger's turret began to traverse. Morrison made his decision. His gunner, Corporal James Webb, already had the range. 1,000 yards, side aspect. The Tiger's turret, not the glacis plate. Webb fired. The 90mm gun's report was distinctive, sharper than a 76mm, deeper than the German 75. A crack that announced American tank destroyer presence across frozen Belgian countryside. The HVAP round covered 1,000 yards in under 2 seconds. It struck the King Tiger's turret at the junction between turret ring and hull. Metal shrieked. The massive German tank shuddered. Smoke began venting from hatches. Morrison's crew had just accomplished what American tankers had been told was nearly impossible for most of 1944. They'd killed a King Tiger, but they'd done it exactly the way every M36 crew manual instructed, from the flank, at moderate range, with one of their 3 HVAP rounds, against the turret, not the frontal armor. This single engagement would be documented, studied, and cited in intelligence reports. One of the successful M36 versus King Tiger encounters, proof that American tank destroyers could deal with Germany's heaviest armor. But what those reports rarely mentioned was the context, the limitation, the uncomfortable truth that American military leadership and German tank commanders would both discover through the final months of 1944. The 90mm gun that was supposed to end Tiger supremacy had a secret, a weakness hidden behind impressive ballistics tables and confident intelligence assessments. When firing standard ammunition at King Tiger frontal armor, the M36 Jackson was almost helpless. And the HVAP ammunition that could theoretically change that equation existed in quantities so limited that most M36 crews would never see it. This is the story of a weapons system that American soldiers believed would revolutionize tank warfare, of German commanders who faced a new threat they'd been trained to fear, and of the testing, combat experience, and brutal mathematics that revealed an uncomfortable reality on both sides of the front lines. The story of why the sound of a 90mm gun striking armor sometimes meant less than either army wanted to admit. The M36 Jackson's development began in September 1942, when American engineers recognized that the 3-inch gun mounted on the M10 Wolverine tank destroyer would soon be inadequate against emerging German armor. Intelligence reports from North Africa described new German tanks with armor thick enough to defeat American anti-tank weapons at practical combat ranges. The Panther. The Tiger. Vehicles that represented a quantum leap in German armored capability. The solution seemed obvious: mount a larger gun. The army already possessed an excellent 90mm anti-aircraft gun, the M1. It fired a projectile large enough and fast enough to threaten heavily armored targets. Converting it for anti-tank use would give American forces the firepower they desperately needed. The first prototype, designated T-71, mounted a 90mm gun in a new turret on an M10A1 chassis. Testing began in March 1943. The gun's performance impressed evaluators. With standard M82 armor-piercing capped ammunition, the 90mm gun could penetrate 129mm of armor, angled at 30 degrees at 500 yards. This was comparable to the famous 88mm Quay 36 gun mounted on the Tiger I, but American engineers knew the Germans weren't standing still. Reports from the Eastern Front described a new heavy tank, heavier than the Tiger I, more heavily armored, armed with a longer, more powerful 88mm gun, the Tiger II. Intelligence estimates suggested this vehicle's frontal armor would measure 150mm on the glacis plate, sloped at 50 degrees, 180mm on the turret front. Against such armor, standard 90mm ammunition would be inadequate. The muzzle velocity of 2,650 feet per second simply wouldn't generate sufficient striking energy to penetrate at combat ranges. Not frontally. Not with any reliability. The solution existed. High-velocity armor, piercing ammunition, HVAP. Designated T-30, this round used a tungsten carbide penetrator surrounded by a lightweight aluminum body. The smaller, denser penetrator achieved much higher velocities, 3,350 feet per second from the M3 90mm gun. The increased velocity meant dramatically improved penetration. Theoretically, development of HVAP ammunition represented a triumph of American metallurgy and industrial engineering. The tungsten carbide cores required precision manufacturing. The aluminum bodies needed careful machining to ensure the penetrator remained centered during flight. Quality control was critical. A misaligned core would cause the round to tumble, destroying accuracy and penetration. But production faced an immediate problem: tungsten. The critical ingredient that made HVAP possible existed in limited quantities. The United States imported substantial amounts from China, but wartime disruption of shipping, competing industrial demands, and the sheer difficulty of extracting and refining tungsten meant supplies remained constrained throughout 1944. The Ordnance Department faced hard choices. Tungsten went into machine tools, armor-piercing ammunition for multiple calibers, electronic components. Everyone wanted more tungsten. No one could have as much as they requested. For HVAP production, this meant limited manufacturing runs. The 76mm HVAP round for Sherman tanks received priority. Production never exceeded 6,000 rounds per month. 90mm HVAP for the M36 and M26 Pershing received even lower priority initially. The first M36S, shipped to Europe in September 1944, carried primarily standard M82 ammunition. HVAP allocation came later, in small quantities, and often arrived irregularly. The M36 itself entered production in June 1944. Fisher Tank Arsenal built the first units by mounting new turrets on M10A1 hulls. Production accelerated through summer and autumn. By October, enough M36S existed to equip several Tank Destroyer Battalions deploying to Europe. Crews receiving the new vehicle underwent abbreviated training. The 90mm gun was more powerful than anything American tank destroyers had mounted previously, but the fundamentals remained unchanged. Tank destroyer doctrine emphasized mobility, concealment, and ambush tactics. Wait for enemy armor to expose itself. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. Engage from prepared positions. Withdraw before enemy forces could concentrate against you. What crews learned about the 90mm gun impressed them. The weapon was accurate, recoil was manageable. The M76F telescope provided excellent optics for acquiring targets at long range. Initial production, M36S lacked muzzle brakes, and crews complained about the massive muzzle blast that obscured their vision and announced their position dramatically. But a double-baffle muzzle brake was retrofitted to all vehicles beginning in November 1944, significantly reducing the problem. The M36's armor protection was minimal. The open-topped turret provided no overhead cover. Side armor measured only 25mm. Frontal armor on the hull reached 76mm maximum, sloped at 38 degrees. This was adequate against small arms and artillery fragments, useless against German tank guns. But tank destroyers weren't designed to absorb hits. They were designed to deliver hits without being detected. The M36's real protection came from its ability to engage targets from concealment at ranges where German tanks would struggle to return effective fire. American intelligence officers compiled detailed briefings on the M36's capabilities. These documents circulated through armored units in autumn 1944. The message was consistent and optimistic. The 90mm gun could engage Panthers at 1,500 yards, Tigers at 1,000 yards. With HVAP ammunition, even King Tigers were vulnerable. What those briefings rarely emphasized were the limitations. The word vulnerable carried multiple meanings. Yes, the 90mm gun with HVAP could theoretically penetrate King Tiger armor. But where? At what range? At what angles? Under what conditions? The answers to these questions would prove far more complicated than initial assessments suggested. The King Tiger began appearing in combat in August 1944, first in Normandy, then in increasing numbers as German forces fell back toward the Reich. Intelligence summaries described a vehicle that outclassed anything the Western Allies fielded. Frontal armor effectively immune to most American and British tank guns. A KUK 43 88mm L-71 gun that could penetrate 150mm of armor at 2,000 meters. Psychologically, the King Tiger's impact was immediate. American tank crews, who'd grown accustomed to tactical superiority through numbers and air support, now faced a weapon that reversed the equation. A single King Tiger in a defensive position could dominate an entire sector. Sherman crews learned to request tank destroyer support specifically when King Tigers were reported. Let the 90mm guns deal with the heavy German armor. But M36 crews discovering King Tigers in their sectors faced an uncomfortable reality. Their briefings said the 90mm gun could engage King Tigers effectively. Combat experience rapidly revealed the gap between capability and practical application. The first large-scale testing of captured King Tigers by American forces occurred in autumn 1944. 2 King Tigers had been captured relatively intact near Sandom in Poland by Soviet forces in August. These were shipped to the Kubinka Proving Ground for evaluation. American engineers received detailed reports on Soviet testing, including armor penetration data. Additional King Tigers were captured in France and Belgium as German forces retreated. Several relatively intact vehicles reached American testing facilities. The most comprehensive evaluation would be conducted by the 703rd Tank Destroyer Battalion in December 1944. This testing program would change everything American tank destroyer crews thought they knew about fighting King Tigers. The testing took place at a range in Belgium, using a recently captured King Tiger that had been abandoned near the German border. The vehicle was positioned at various ranges and angles. American tank destroyer crews from the 703rd fired multiple types of 90mm ammunition at different aspects of the King Tiger's armor. The results were systematically documented. Standard M82 armor-piercing capped ammunition, 500 yards. Frontal glacis impact, no penetration. The round struck, sparked, and ricocheted. The King Tiger's sloped frontal armor, 150mm thick at 50 degrees, was effectively immune. 1,000 yards, same ammunition, same result, no penetration. The M82 round simply lacked the striking energy to defeat armor of that thickness at that angle. Turret front engagement, 1,000 yards, M82 ammunition, limited penetration. The round struck the mantlet area, 180mm thick. In some cases, the round penetrated partially, but failed to achieve full penetration that would damage internal components or injure crew. The testing officer's conclusion was unambiguous. Standard 90mm ammunition could not reliably penetrate King Tiger frontal armor at any practical combat range. Flank and rear shots remained viable. Turret shots at closer ranges might achieve penetration, but the frontal aspect, the most likely engagement scenario in defensive warfare, was effectively immune. Then they tested HVAP. The 703rd Tank Destroyer Battalion had received a limited allocation of T-30 HVAP rounds, 20 rounds total. These represented a significant portion of available HVAP inventory in theatre at that time. The testing used 3 rounds on frontal glacis shots, 500 yards, T-30 HVAP, frontal glacis. The round struck at 3,350 feet per second, carrying significantly more kinetic energy than the M82. It penetrated the surface of the armor. Then it broke apart. The tungsten carbide core, striking the heavily sloped surface at high velocity, shattered. Fragments penetrated shallow depth but caused no significant internal damage. The King Tiger would have remained combat effective. The testers adjusted. 1,000 yards, HVAP, turret front, better results. The round achieved partial penetration in the 180mm turret armor, but again, the core showed tendency to break up on impact with the thick, hard, German face-hardened armor plate. The testing revealed a problem that Aberdeen Proving Ground engineers had noted earlier but hadn't fully communicated to field units. HVAP ammunition was designed for penetration through sheer velocity, but the T-30 round had a critical weakness. When striking very thick, heavily sloped armor, the tungsten carbide core was prone to shattering on impact. The extreme velocity that made penetration possible also created stresses that exceeded the core's structural limits. This was why testing on captured Panther tanks in October 1944 had produced disappointing results. The 90mm HVAP hadn't punched through Panther frontal slope. Engineers were working on an improved version, designated T30E16, with a redesigned core that would resist breakup better. But that round wouldn't be available until April 1945. The 703rd Tank Destroyer Battalion's report, classified and distributed to tank destroyer commands in late December 1944, contained a conclusion that contradicted months of optimistic assessments. Quote, "The 90mm gun M3, when firing currently available ammunition, including T-30 HVAP, cannot theoretically penetrate Tiger II frontal armor at any practical combat range. Engagement from frontal aspects is not tactically viable with available ammunition. Crews must maneuver for flank shots or coordinate with artillery and air support." End quote. This report reached tank destroyer battalions in the field just as the Battle of the Bulge was beginning. Thousands of American soldiers were about to discover firsthand what the testing had revealed. The weapon they'd been told would neutralize King Tiger's frontally could not, in fact, reliably do so. German tank commanders received their own intelligence assessments about the M36. These reports came from multiple sources: interrogations of American prisoners, examination of destroyed M36s, radio intercepts, and most importantly, combat experience from crews who'd engaged the new American tank destroyer and survived. The German assessment was remarkably accurate. The M36 mounted a 90mm gun, roughly equivalent in performance to the Tiger I's KOK 36. Against Panthers, it was extremely dangerous. Against Tiger Is, it posed a serious threat at moderate ranges. But against the King Tiger, German intelligence concluded that frontal engagements favored the German vehicle decisively. A captured German intelligence summary from December 1944, recovered from the wreckage of a German headquarters vehicle, stated the threat clearly. Quote, "The American M36 mounts a 9cm gun of high velocity. This weapon can penetrate Panther turret armor at ranges exceeding 1,500 meters. Tiger I armor may be penetrated at ranges exceeding 800 meters from favorable angles. Tiger II frontal armor remains immune to this weapon at combat ranges when using standard American ammunition. Special American ammunition with tungsten cores exists but appears in very limited numbers. All Tiger II commanders are instructed to engage M36 vehicles at maximum range before they can maneuver for flank shots." End quote. This assessment was fundamentally correct. German tank commanders understood exactly what they faced. The M36 was dangerous if it achieved favorable positioning, but in frontal combat, the King Tiger retained decisive advantage. The psychological dimension was more complex. Obersturmführer Michael Wittmann, one of Germany's most successful tank aces, had been killed in August 1944 in Normandy. His Tiger I had been destroyed, most likely by fire from British Sherman Fireflies mounting 17-pounder guns. His death sent shockwaves through German armoured forces. If Wittmann could be killed, any tank commander could be killed. By December 1944, German tank crews were exhausted. They'd retreated across France. They'd watched the Luftwaffe disappear from the skies. They'd seen fuel allocations cut repeatedly. They knew Germany was losing. The appearance of American 90mm guns represented another indicator of Allied industrial superiority, another weapon system they had to worry about, another threat that required vigilance and tactical adjustment. For American crews, the psychological equation was different. They'd spent months being told that German armor was superior, that Panthers could destroy, Shermans at ranges where return fire was impossible, that Tigers were nearly invincible. The M36, with its 90mm gun and HVAP ammunition, was supposed to change that calculation. It was supposed to restore confidence. The testing results from the 703rd Tank Destroyer Battalion threatened to undermine that confidence at the worst possible time. Just as German forces were launching their last Great Western Offensive, December 16, 1944, the Ardennes Forest, German forces struck American positions along a lightly defended sector in Belgium and Luxembourg, Operation Wacht am Rhein, the Battle of the Bulge, the largest battle fought by the United States Army in World War II. The German offensive deployed approximately 72,000 soldiers and over 750 armoured vehicles. Among those vehicles were 52 King Tigers, 45 from Schwer SS Panzerabteilung 501, attached to 1st SS Panzer Division, 7, more distributed among other units. American forces defending the Ardennes included multiple tank destroyer battalions equipped with M36s, the 702nd Tank Destroyer Battalion, the 601st Tank Destroyer Battalion, the 803rd Tank Destroyer Battalion, others. These units would face German armour in desperate defensive fighting across frozen Belgian countryside. The first encounters between M36s and King Tigers during the Bulge occurred on December 18th near Stavelot. Kampfgruppe Piper, spearheading 1st SS Panzer Division's advance, pushed westward with approximately 6 King Tigers among their armoured strength. American forces attempted to establish blocking positions. M36s from the 803rd Tank Destroyer Battalion moved into position near the Amblev River. The engagement was brief and brutal. The King Tigers advanced along the main road. American tank destroyers opened fire from concealed positions at ranges between 800 and 1,200 yards. Several hits were observed on King Tiger hulls and turrets. No confirmed kills. The King Tigers returned fire. Their Kiao K-43 guns engaged American positions with devastating accuracy. 2 M36s were destroyed. 3 more damaged. The survivors withdrew. After-action reports from the 803rd noted the problem immediately. Standard ammunition was ineffective against frontal armour. HVAP was not available in sufficient quantity. The battalion had received only 12 HVAP rounds total. Those rounds were being held for emergency use. Crews were instructed to manoeuvre for flank shots or call for artillery support, rather than engage King Tigers frontally. Near Street, Vith on December 19th and 20th, the 702nd Tank Destroyer Battalion engaged German armour supporting attacks against American defensive positions. The fighting was chaotic. Close range, often at night or in heavy fog, visibility limited, target identification difficult. 1M36. Crew from C Company, 702nd Tank Destroyer Battalion, commanded by Staff Sergeant Thomas Harrington, encountered what they identified as a King Tiger at approximately 600 yards range. The engagement occurred in failing light. The King Tiger was moving obliquely to their position. Not quite a flank shot, but not frontal either. Approximately 45-degree angle, Harrington's gunner fired. Standard M82 ammunition. The round struck the King Tiger's side hull armour, approximately 80 mm thick. Penetration. The German tank continued moving for approximately 50 yards, then stopped. Smoke began venting from engine compartment. The crew bailed out. This was one of the few documented M36 kills of a King Tiger during the Bulge, but examination afterward revealed the truth. The penetrating hit had struck near the engine compartment, damaging fuel lines and causing a fire. The King Tiger's armour hadn't failed. The hit had achieved a mobility kill through fortunate shot placement against thinner side armour. The most revealing encounter occurred near Freihaldenhoven on December 22nd. This engagement would be documented exhaustively because both vehicles survived, and both crews were available for detailed debriefing afterward. An M36 from the 702nd Tank Destroyer Battalion encountered a King Tiger from Schwer Panzerabteilung 506 at approximately 1,000 yards range. The German tank was moving along a road, heading toward American positions. The M36 crew had been warned that King Tigers were operating in their sector. They'd requested HVAP ammunition. None was available. The M36 commander made the decision to engage anyway. His gunner fired 8 rounds. All 8 struck the King Tiger. 3 hit the frontal glacis. 2 hit the turret front. 3 hit the turret side at oblique angles. None achieved penetration that disabled the vehicle or injured the crew. The King Tiger's commander, Unterscharführer Heinrich Müller, reported afterward that his crew felt every impact. The strikes were violent, alarming. But the armour held. What finally disabled his tank wasn't American fire. It was a 9th round that struck the muzzle brake on the King Tiger's main gun, damaging the barrel enough that the weapon could no longer be fired accurately. Unable to return effective fire, Müller ordered his crew to withdraw. The King Tiger retreated under its own power. The M36 crew claimed a probable kill. Intelligence officers reviewing the engagement concluded it was a mobility kill or weapon system kill. But the truth was simpler. 8 90mm hits from standard ammunition at 1,000 yards had failed to achieve lethal penetration. The King Tiger's armor had performed exactly as designed. This engagement would later be photographed and documented. The King Tiger, designated number 332, was eventually captured intact when German forces abandoned it due to fuel exhaustion days later. Examination showed all 8 impact points clearly. The armor had been struck, gouged, dented, but not defeated. American tank destroyer crews learned brutal lessons quickly during the Bulge. The 90mm gun was excellent against Panthers. Effective against Tiger is from favorable angles. Marginally useful against King Tigers unless HVAP was available and flank shots could be achieved. But HVAP remained desperately scarce. Tank destroyer battalions engaged in the Bulge reported HVAP allocation ranging from 0 rounds to 20 rounds per battalion. Most crews never fired a single HVAP round during the entire battle. They fought with what they had: standard M82 ammunition, careful positioning, and the hope that German tanks would expose their flanks. The sound of a 90mm gun became psychologically significant for both sides. For American forces, it meant tank destroyer support was present. That meant heavy German armor could, theoretically, be engaged. For German tank commanders, the distinctive crack of an M36 firing meant they were under attack from a weapon that required immediate response. Even if their frontal armor was effectively immune, the M36 could maneuver for killing shots. It had to be dealt with. This psychological warfare operated independently of the actual ballistic reality. King Tiger commanders knew rationally that frontal hits from 90mm guns posed minimal threat. But combat isn't rational. The violence of impact, the uncertainty, the knowledge that American tank destroyers were hunting for angles. All of this created stress and forced tactical adjustments. German tanks buttoned up when M36s were reported. They maintained maximum distance. They prioritized destroying American tank destroyers over other targets. The M36 commanded respect not because it could reliably penetrate King Tiger frontal armor, but because it represented a threat that demanded attention. For American crews, the psychological burden was heavier. They'd been told their weapon would be effective. Combat revealed the limitations. Fighting a King Tiger frontally with standard ammunition felt hopeless. Like hammering a sledgehammer against a fortress wall. You could make noise, you could create sparks. But you couldn't achieve decisive effect. Crew morale suffered. Tank destroyer doctrine emphasized aggressive offensive action. Hunt the enemy, engage decisively, withdraw. But how do you engage decisively when your primary weapon can't penetrate your primary target from the most common engagement aspect? The Battle of the Bulge lasted from December 16, 1944 to January 25, 1945. German forces advanced approximately 65 miles at maximum penetration before American counterattacks contained and then reversed the offensive. During those 40 days, M36 tank destroyers engaged German armor across the entire battle space. The 2nd Tank Destroyer Battalion alone claimed 19 German tanks destroyed. The 601st claimed 17. The 803rd claimed 12. Other battalions added to the totals. Intelligence officers analyzing these claims after the battle applied adjustment factors based on typical overclaiming rates and evidence from captured German records. The adjusted totals were lower. Perhaps half the original claims represented confirmed kills. The rest were damaged vehicles, probable kills, or cases where multiple American units claimed the same German tank. Of the confirmed M36 kills during the Bulge, the vast majority were Panthers, Panzer IVs, and other medium German armour. King Tiger kills specifically attributed to M36 fire numbered fewer than 10 across the entire battle. Most of those were flank shots, turret hits at close range, or mobility kills from lucky hits on vulnerable components. The King Tigers present during the Bulge suffered heavy losses. Of the 52 King Tigers that began the offensive, only 15 remained operational by January 8, 1945. 11 were undergoing repairs. 26 had been lost completely. But examination of German loss reports revealed something striking. The majority of King Tiger losses weren't from M36 fire. They were from mechanical breakdown, fuel exhaustion, and abandonment. The King Tiger's chronic mechanical unreliability, documented extensively in earlier German operations, proved decisive again. Heavy SS Panzer Abteilung 501 began the Bulge with 45 King Tigers. By the end of the offensive, they reported 15 operational, 11 in repair, and 19 lost. Of those 19 losses, German records indicated that 7 were abandoned due to mechanical failure, 8 were abandoned due to fuel exhaustion, 2 were destroyed by artillery, and only 2 were confirmed destroyed by direct tank fire. The brutal arithmetic was clear. The King Tiger's greatest vulnerability wasn't American 90mm guns. It was German logistics and mechanical complexity. But that wasn't the story American soldiers or German commanders focused on during combat. They focused on the immediate threat, the weapon firing at them right now. After the Bulge, American ordnance officers compiled comprehensive reports on M36 combat performance. These documents circulated through armoured commands in late January and February 1945. The conclusions were carefully worded but unambiguous. The 90mm gun M3 was highly effective against German medium armour. Panthers could be engaged at 1,500 yards with high probability of penetration. Panzer IVs, Stug assault guns, and other vehicles equipped with armour under 100mm thickness were vulnerable at all combat ranges. Against Tiger I tanks, the 90mm gun remained effective at ranges exceeding 1,000 yards when firing at turret or side aspects. Frontal engagements required closer ranges, preferably under 800 yards. Against Tiger II tanks, the report stated clearly, frontal engagements are not recommended with available ammunition. Crews should maneuver for flank shots, coordinate with supporting arms, or bypass and report position for air or artillery engagement. Then came the section on HVAP ammunition. The report noted that T-30 HVAP rounds offered improved penetration performance but remained in critically short supply. Quote, HVAP allocation to Tank Destroyer Battalions remains insufficient for operational requirements. Current production capacity cannot meet field demand. Units should consider HVAP as emergency ammunition only, reserved for situations where standard ammunition is demonstrably inadequate and no tactical alternatives exist. This was bureaucratic language describing a fundamental problem. The ammunition that could theoretically allow M36s to engage King Tigers frontally existed in such small quantities that most crews would never fire it in combat. The improved T-30E16 HVAP round began reaching Europe in April 1945. This version had a redesigned tungsten core that resisted breakup better when striking heavily sloped armour. Testing showed significantly improved performance against captured Panther and King Tiger armor samples. But by April 1945, the war in Europe was entering its final weeks. German armored forces were collapsing. King Tiger encounters became increasingly rare as German fuel supplies dwindled to nothing and mechanical attrition destroyed remaining vehicles faster than combat ever could. The final documented engagement between an M36 and a King Tiger occurred near Kassel, Germany, on April 4, 1945. 3rd Armoured Division elements, supported by tank destroyers from the 629th Tank Destroyer Battalion, encountered 3 King Tigers defending a road junction. The engagement was brief. The King Tigers were stationary, dug in, nearly immobile due to fuel shortages. They'd been positioned to cover the road but couldn't maneuver. American forces called in artillery. P-47 Thunderbolts arrived and bombed the positions. M36s engaged from long range, firing standard ammunition to suppress the German tanks while infantry maneuvered around the flanks. All 3 King Tigers were eventually abandoned by their crews. Post-battle examination showed multiple 90mm hits on each vehicle. None had achieved penetration. The King Tigers were captured intact, out of fuel, unable to retreat. This engagement typified the final phase of the war. German armour became increasingly immobile. Strategic positioning mattered less when you couldn't move. The fearsome guns couldn't engage targets outside their limited traverse. The thick armour meant nothing when American forces could simply bypass and isolate. The question of whether 90mm HVAP meant frontal death for King Tiger, commanders became increasingly hypothetical. By May 1945, almost no King Tigers remained operational. The few that did fell to mechanical failure, air attack, or capture rather than direct tank combat. American interrogators questioned captured King Tiger commanders extensively after the war. The interrogations focused on German tactical doctrine, armor effectiveness, and psychological factors in tank combat. Sturmbannführer Hans Weiss, who'd commanded Schwer Panzerabteilung 506 during the Bulge, provided detailed testimony in June 1945. His assessment was brutally honest, quote, "The American 90mm gun was a serious threat that required tactical adjustment. We were instructed to engage these vehicles at maximum range and prioritize their destruction. In frontal combat, our armor provided adequate protection against their standard ammunition. We were briefed that American special ammunition with tungsten cores existed, but in our entire battalion we encountered this ammunition only twice, both times from flank shots that penetrated. The psychological effect of the 90mm gun was significant. The impacts were violent, but our frontal armor held. The greater problem was that engaging American tank destroyers required us to stop, expose ourselves, and burn fuel we didn't have. Often it was better to withdraw than to fight, but withdrawal required fuel we also didn't have. In the end, more of our tanks were lost to empty fuel tanks than to enemy fire." End quote. Obersturmbannführer Joachim Paper, who'd commanded Kampfgruppe Paper during the Bulge, was more dismissive in his testimony. He stated that King Tigers were complete overkill for the Ardennes operation. The vehicles were too heavy for the roads, too fuel-hungry for the limited supplies available, and their tactical advantages were negated by American air superiority and artillery. He stated he would have preferred more Panthers, which were faster, more reliable, and consumed less fuel while still providing sufficient armor and firepower for the mission. The American assessment, compiled by the Army Ordnance Department in July 1945, reached conclusions that contradicted 19 months of confident briefings and optimistic projections. The 90mm gun M3 was an excellent anti-tank weapon. Against 90% of German armoured vehicles, it provided decisive capability at combat ranges. But against the heaviest German armour, specifically the Tiger II, the weapon's effectiveness depended entirely on factors beyond American control. HVAP availability, tactical positioning, German mechanical reliability, luck. The report concluded that future tank development should prioritize guns capable of defeating the heaviest possible enemy armor with standard ammunition at combat ranges. Relying on special ammunition that might not be available when needed was strategically unsound. The lesson learned: design for worst-case scenarios, not optimal conditions. The post-war interrogation of German engineers who designed the King Tiger revealed the other side of this story. Henschel engineers, questioned by Allied technical intelligence teams in May and June 1945, provided detailed testimony about armor design philosophy and protection priorities. Erwin Adders, a senior engineer at Henschel, explained the armor design calculations. Quote, "We knew from intelligence reports in 1943 that the Americans were developing larger caliber tank guns. We received information about the 90mm anti-aircraft gun and projections that it would be adapted for anti-tank use. Our armor protection specifications for the Tiger II were designed to defeat this weapon when firing standard armor-piercing ammunition at combat ranges exceeding 500 meters. We calculated required thickness and slope angles to ensure ricochets or non-penetrating strikes. The armor, steel quality was specified to maximize hardness without excessive brittleness. We knew the Americans might develop special ammunition with tungsten cores, but we also knew tungsten was in short supply globally. We assessed that such ammunition would be rare and rationed carefully. Our armor design proved correct. Standard American 90mm ammunition could not penetrate our frontal armor at combat ranges." End quote. This testimony confirmed what American testing had discovered. The King Tiger's armor had been specifically designed to defeat 90mm guns firing standard ammunition. The Germans had calculated correctly. They'd anticipated the threat and engineered a solution. The fact that solution came packaged in a 70-ton vehicle so mechanically complex and fuel-hungry it couldn't be sustained in combat operations was a different problem, but the armor itself worked exactly as designed. Dr. Ferdinand Porsche, whose competing Tiger II design had been rejected in favor of Henschel's version, provided additional context in his testimony. He noted that both competing designs for the Tiger II incorporated armor intended to defeat increasingly powerful Allied anti-tank weapons. The question had never been whether the armor could stop enemy fire. The question had always been whether Germany could produce, fuel, maintain, and deploy enough of these vehicles to matter strategically. Porsche's assessment: Germany could not. The entire heavy tank program represented misallocated resources that should have gone to more numerous, more reliable medium tanks. American tank designers studied the King Tiger combat data extensively in late 1945 and early 1946. The lessons influenced development of the M36 Pershing's successor, which would become the M46 pattern, and longer-term planning for what would become the M47 and M48 series. The primary lesson: gun performance must be adequate to defeat expected enemy armor with standard ammunition that could be produced and supplied in sufficient quantities. Relying on special ammunition created vulnerabilities. What if production failed? What if supply lines were disrupted? What if allocation priorities changed? Standard ammunition must be sufficient. This drove development of the T-100 and 1990mm gun, which fired improved ammunition at higher chamber pressures, achieving better penetration with conventional projectiles. This gun would equip the M46 pattern and early M47 pattern tanks. The improved T-139 variant, standardized as the 90mm gun M41, equipped M48 Patton tanks used extensively in the Vietnam War. But the deeper lesson involved strategic thinking about tank warfare itself. The M36 experience revealed that tactical superiority in individual engagements mattered less than operational sustainability across campaigns. A tank destroyer that could theoretically defeat any enemy armor but lacked ammunition to do so was less useful than a more modest weapon that could engage all targets with available ammunition. The King Tiger demonstrated the same principle from the opposite direction. Tactical invincibility meant nothing if the vehicle couldn't reach the battlefield, couldn't maneuver once there, and couldn't be resupplied when fuel ran out. The most powerful armor and gun in the world became expensive, immobile sculpture when the logistics infrastructure collapsed. American armor doctrine evolved to emphasize sustained operations. Reliability became a design priority equal to firepower and protection. Fuel efficiency mattered. Mechanical simplicity mattered. The ability to repair vehicles in the field mattered. All the lessons the Germans had failed to learn, American designers absorbed completely. The M36 itself continued serving after World War II. The vehicle saw extensive combat in Korea, where its 90mm gun proved highly effective against Soviet T-34-85 tanks supplied to North Korean forces. In Korea, HVAP ammunition was available in adequate quantities, and the enemy armor required less penetration. The M36 performed exactly as designed in that conflict. Yugoslavia received approximately 400 M36 tank destroyers through military assistance programs. These vehicles served into the 1990s, some re-engined with Soviet diesel engines. During the Yugoslav wars of the 1990s, M36S saw combat, remarkably still effective against modern armored personnel carriers and light armored vehicles despite being 50 years old. Pakistan, South Korea, Iran, and other nations operated M36S for decades. The basic design proved remarkably enduring. The reliable M4 Sherman chassis, the powerful 90mm gun, simple mechanics that local technicians could maintain. The M36 represented American engineering philosophy. Build weapons that work, that can be sustained, that don't require perfection to be useful. The King Tiger followed a different trajectory. After the war, only a handful survived. Most had been destroyed, abandoned, or scrapped. The few intact examples became museum pieces, monuments to German engineering ambition that exceeded practical sustainability. The King Tiger at the Musée des Blindés in Saumur, France, remains the only fully functional example. Restored painstakingly over years, it demonstrates what German engineers achieved: the power, the precision, the imposing presence. Visitors standing before it understand immediately why Allied tank crews feared this vehicle, but the placard beside it tells the fuller story. 500 total production, chronic mechanical problems, fuel consumption that made sustained operations impossible, a weapon that looked invincible on paper but couldn't win wars. The American Heritage Museum in Massachusetts displays M36 No. 332. The King Tiger captured near Petit Coup, Belgium, in December 1944. The vehicle that was hit 8 times by M36 90mm, fire without fatal penetration, the impacts are still visible, gouges in the armor, dents in the turret face, evidence of the engagement. The museum placard explains what happened, how the M36 crew fired repeatedly, how the armor held, how the final round damaged the gun barrel, forcing the German crew to withdraw, how the King Tiger was eventually abandoned when fuel ran out. The story encapsulates the entire dynamic of late-war German armor: tactically superior, operationally unsustainable. Modern main battle tanks incorporate lessons from both vehicles. The M1 Abrams, introduced in 1980, carries over 500 gallons of fuel and achieves approximately 0.6 miles per gallon, providing operational range exceeding 300 miles on roads. Despite being a gas turbine-powered 70-ton vehicle, the Abrams maintains sufficient operational range for deep strikes and mobile operations. The Abrams' main gun, the 105mm M68 initially and later, the 120mm M256, was designed to defeat any expected enemy armor with standard ammunition. Depleted uranium penetrators provide exceptional performance, but the gun remains effective with conventional ammunition. No reliance on rare materials that might be unavailable when needed. Armor protection on the Abrams uses composite materials, reactive armor, and advanced geometries to defeat threats while maintaining reasonable weight. The vehicle is mechanically complex but designed for field maintenance. Modules can be replaced quickly. Engines can be swapped. The supply chain supports sustained operations. These design priorities reflect lessons learned partly from examining the M36 versus King Tiger dynamic. Build weapons that work in realistic conditions. Ensure ammunition can be produced in sufficient quantities. Prioritize operational sustainability alongside tactical capability. Don't design for perfect conditions that won't exist in combat. The sound of a 90mm gun firing became less relevant than whether that gun could be supplied with ammunition, whether the vehicle could reach the battlefield, whether crews could be trained effectively, and whether the entire system could be sustained across extended campaigns. The question posed by this story, did 90mm HVAP mean frontal death for King Tiger commanders, has a complex answer. Theoretically, yes. Testing showed that improved HVAP rounds could penetrate King Tiger frontal armor under certain conditions. Practically, no. HVAP existed in such limited quantities that most engagements involved standard ammunition that couldn't reliably penetrate. But the more important answer is that the question itself was strategically irrelevant. The King Tiger's downfall wasn't vulnerability to 90mm guns. It was vulnerability to empty fuel tanks, broken transmissions, seized engines, and the systematic collapse of German logistics under Allied air interdiction. The M36's limitation wasn't insufficient gun performance against the heaviest enemy armor. It was insufficient supply of the special ammunition needed to achieve that performance. And the American response bypassing, isolating, and destroying King Tigers with artillery and air power rather than risking tank versus tank duels proved tactically sound. Staff Sergeant Robert Morrison, who'd killed a King Tiger near Freihaldenhoven in December 1944, survived the war. He returned to the United States in July 1945. In interviews decades later, he described the engagement that opened this story, the moment he saw the massive King Tiger through the winter haze, the decision to fire, the relief when his HVAP round penetrated the turret from the flank. He also described the nightmares that followed, the nights he dreamed of encountering King Tigers head-on, where his 90mm gun couldn't penetrate, where he was trapped, helpless, waiting for the 88mm gun to destroy his tank destroyer. These were the psychological scars of fighting an enemy whose armor seemed invincible. But Morrison also noted something else in those interviews. The King Tigers he encountered during the Bulge were often stationary, out of position, unable to maneuver effectively, abandoned by crews who'd run out of fuel. He said, quote, "We were terrified of those tanks. But looking back, I think they were more dangerous in our imaginations than in reality. We had 3 real chances to engage King Tigers during the Bulge. One we killed with HVAP from the side, one withdrew when we damaged its gun, one was abandoned before we even engaged it. The psychological impact of knowing they existed was worse than actually fighting them." End quote. This testimony captures the essence of the King Tiger's impact on the Western Front. The fear exceeded the reality. The reputation outlasted the actual threat. By the time M36s arrived in sufficient numbers to matter, German armoured forces were already collapsing from internal contradictions. Fuel shortages, mechanical complexity, industrial capacity overwhelmed by Allied bombing, logistics infrastructure systematically destroyed. The sound of a 90mm gun firing meant different things to different people at different times. To American crews in October 1944, when M36s first arrived in theatre, it meant hope. Finally, a weapon that could engage German heavy armour on something approaching equal terms. To German tank commanders, it meant caution, a threat that required tactical adjustment and careful positioning. By December 1944, during the Bulge, the sound meant frustration for American crews. They were firing a powerful weapon that couldn't reliably defeat their primary target frontally with available ammunition. For German commanders, it meant another problem added to an overwhelming list, another weapon system to worry about when they lacked fuel to maneuver, spare parts to repair damage, and air cover to protect movements. By April 1945, the sound meant little to either side. German armoured resistance was collapsing. King Tigers were abandoned before they could be engaged. The tactical dynamics of tank warfare became irrelevant when one side could no longer sustain operations. The story of the M36 versus the King Tiger isn't really about guns, armour, and ammunition types. It's about the difference between tactical capability and strategic sustainability, about the gap between what weapons can theoretically achieve and what they can actually accomplish in realistic combat conditions, about the importance of logistics, reliability, and industrial capacity in determining military outcomes. The Germans built a tank that could defeat any Allied weapon in direct combat, but they couldn't build enough of them, couldn't fuel them adequately, couldn't maintain them in the field, couldn't replace them when lost. The tactical superiority became strategically meaningless. The Americans built a tank destroyer that couldn't reliably penetrate the heaviest German armour frontally with standard ammunition, but they built enough of them, supplied them adequately, maintained them effectively, developed tactics that worked around the limitations. The tactical weakness became strategically manageable. War is won by systems, not weapons. The M36 was part of a system that worked, supply chains that delivered fuel, ammunition, and spare parts, air forces that controlled the skies, artillery that could be called when needed, infantry that could coordinate combined arms operations, industrial capacity that could replace losses, training systems that could produce crews, all integrated into operational doctrine that emphasized sustainability. The King Tiger was part of a system that was failing, supply chains disrupted by bombing, air forces swept from the skies, artillery ammunition rationed, infantry depleted by years of attrition, industrial capacity strained beyond limits, training abbreviated by fuel shortages, all this while being asked to perform miracles with inadequate resources. The sound of a 90mm gun firing, in the end, meant less than the sound of supply trucks arriving with fuel, less than the sound of Allied aircraft overhead, less than the sound of American industrial production continuing at rates Germany couldn't match. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.